Hey, how's it going everybody? This is Craig Peters here from Soundiron, and on today's Soundiron session, we're going to be creating the soundtrack to Hell. Now, with Halloween right around the corner and our recent release of 6-7 Voices of the Dead, which is the final installment of our 6 series, which is a library that basically features a lot of creature and human NPC character voices that you can use for gaming or Foley or overlaying, a bunch of ambience and percussion, all kinds of crazy stuff geared for horror. So this is the demo that I wrote for 6-7. I also used a few other libraries of ours just to kind of help aid to that horror feel. Originally, when I was starting to write this, I wasn't sure exactly where I was going to go with it, but as I started writing it, it definitely started to feel like this would be the soundtrack to Hell. Now, that could mean many different things to many people, but I thought it'd be kind of fun to break down and show you guys how I did some things. I did some things that I've been wanting to do with other instruments, with processing them in different ways. So let's go ahead and check out the track and then we'll break it down. All right, so that is my demo that I wrote for 6-7. Let's just go ahead and we'll talk about some of the libraries that I used. So up here, this whole section, this is all 6-7 library stuff. We have some percussion, the Choir of the Dead. So if you have any of our choirs, you know a lot of them are very epic, very good for the symphony type of situation. The Choir of the Dead, it's an interesting take on it. So we'll get into that in a little bit. And then we have some of the human voiceover sounds that we did. We all kind of got together on this one and did our own characters, some more than others. But and then we also have this sustain patch, which is a really cool sort of dark, droney, ambient kind of thing. Yeah, you can just kind of use that to set the mood for whatever you're doing. The top one, the first one that I used was I wanted to build a little bit of a rhythm. So I used some of the percussion that come within this library. When we were out just doing a bunch of sounds and recording, we found some really cool bunkers that had a lot of really interesting sort of percussive rhythmic sounds, either like big bangy metal walls or like little slamming metal lids. Stuff that, when you actually process and use in this kind of thing, it's really fitting. Let's just go ahead and listen to the percussion track just to hear how that sounds by itself. So you can see it's just kind of nothing too crazy, but you can hear that I'm trying to sort of get a little bit of a pulse going. And then after that, let's get into the Choir of the Dead. Now this thing is really pretty crazy for any type of choir thing. It basically sounds like, the Choir of the Dead or a choir from hell. Let's just go ahead and play a little bit of it. All right, so then after that, being that I was trying to sort of create the soundtrack to Hell, or what my version, I guess, would be of the soundtrack to Hell, I thought, what would you hear if you were in Hell? Probably a bunch of people being tortured, right? So on our human and character NPC sort of like voiceover character sounds, there's a whole big list of a bunch of different sort of stylistic things that you would probably come across for, you know, a non-player character for a game. So we have some of these different ones that sound like either, you know, yells, charges, grunts, or, you know, like tortured sounds, yelling, violent deaths. So I used 4 different human characters, and we all, like I said, we all kind of got in on this one. So all the sounds are very different. And so yeah, let's just go ahead now and just hear what it sounds like of just the human torture sort of sounds that I used in this. So now let's go ahead and listen to all the human torture-y stuff with the rest of the 6-7 sounds. So yeah, you can hear how it's kind of starting to get that very hellish kind of sound. After that, I wanted to use some other stuff from our 6 series because it's very great and geared toward horror. So one of my favorite things to use is 6.6, and there's this one patch, it's called the Clusteria patch, and it just has such a cool sound to it when you just listen to it by itself. So you can see that the sounds in this library are very geared toward horror, and I really love those big shrieky sort of you know, string risers. They sound really cool. So along with 6.6, the Clusteria patch, I wanted to combine it with some other sort of shrieky string sounds. So Friendo is kind of a really good library for that because it's a very unorthodox instrument. It was handmade, and it's just, it's not meant to sound pretty, and that's why I like it, because if you're doing horror, you know, you want it to sound ugly and disgusting. So what I did with this is I duplicated it, and I have one pan left and one pan right, and they're both doing different stuff. So that in conjunction with the Clusteria patch really sort of puts you in this kind of stereo field of just like disgusting, eerie sort of string sounds. So let's just go ahead and listen to how that sounds, just those together with the Clusteria and the two Friendo patches. Yeah, I love that kind of stuff. Anytime I can really play around with the stereo field, I'm gonna do it, especially because, you know, if you were doing this in 5.1 or something, if you just had all these different little shrieky string risers kind of playing in different places, you know, it can really add to sort of, you know, those sort of tension cues that you might do. So then after that, I wanted to bring in some other percussion to really sort of accentuate the downbeats, and I used Apocalypse percussion elements. And this is just a really cool library for adding in those big epic percussive kind of sounds. Now this isn't a big epic track, but stuff like this is really good for just kind of, you know, you want to accentuate those downbeats. And after that, I also used our water harp. This is the percussive hands patch. It's a different sort of timbre. The water harp can be used for horror, and it's just a really interesting sort of sound when you actually play it with your hands. So if you listen to some of these. And also with this, I'm using Valhalla Vintage Verb. I'm actually using a lot of reverb on this track in general because I really wanted to have that big sort of full ambient kind of sound. So let's listen to just the water harp and the Apocalypse percussion elements sound just by themselves. wanted to sort of slip in the strings a little bit just so you can kind of hear that in context with this percussion stuff too. Now with these next tracks, this is something that I've been kind of wanting to do for a while. I'm more from a metal background, so you know, I've started off on guitar. The guitar is my main instrument. But since I've gotten into orchestral writing and using strings and more symphonic instruments, I've always wanted to put some distortion on strings because I feel like classical music and metal, you know, you can play classical music on a guitar and it sounds awesome. You could play guitar music on a violin. Sometimes it doesn't always translate, but I mean, musically, a lot of times orchestral and metal seem to work pretty well. So I thought it'd be fun to put some distortion on some strings. So I'm using the Fortin Nameless amp sim. It's a really cool amp sim for if you're doing any sort of metal or metal reamping. So I was like, hey, let's put it on some strings. And I also have some Valhalla Vintage Verb on here as well. And this is just kind of, you know, just bringing in some more big reverb just to sort of give it that space. So let's hear it just by itself, and then we'll put in the amp sim just to see how it sounds with that grit to it. All right, now let's get a little metal with it. Let's put some distortion on here. So yeah, that's definitely a quick way to give your strings a little bit of an edge. And I'm not really using this too melodically. It's more of just kind of like a high-pitched drone in the back. Let's just go ahead and just listen to how this sounds in the way I used it. I also did a little bit of pitch bending too on my mod wheel, just to kind of you know, when you just slightly start to pitch stuff up and pitch it down, you know, it can add that tension, even if it's very subtle. Just that slight little change in pitch can just kind of, you know, it can put you a little uneasy. So let's just go ahead and listen to how this sounds by itself. So you can kind of hear how it's starting to sort of fluctuate, you know, up and down around a half step or so. If this was hell and if there was music playing, it would probably sound like big, heavy, you know, instruments chugging on some sort of distortion. Or at least I would think so anyway. So I thought it'd be cool to also use our cello and basses. This is all the strings are from Hyperion Strings Micro. I'm pretty much just using the spiccato patches for both. They're sort of playing the same note. One's an octave lower on the basses, and then just sort of playing these little, you know, little eighth notes. And yeah, and this is just kind of supporting this sort of chuggy rhythm, basically. Even though it's a spiccato, it's funny. It almost sounds like a palm muted note on a guitar, which is kind of cool. So let's just listen to the sort of chuggy symphonic metal orchestra from hell and see how that sounds. So there you have it. My take on the soundtrack to hell. If you're going to hell, that's probably a tune you would maybe hear on the way down. If you guys want to get any more info on 6-7 Voices of the Dead, you can go to our website. It's currently on sale right now until November 6th. So if you want to add a little bit more to your horror palette as far as sounds, definitely check it out. You can also check out the Sick Bundle, which has all of them together, and you can get a discount on those as well. So if you want to find out any more info on those, make sure to go to soundiron.com. And thank you guys so much for watching. Subscribe if you haven't, and we'll see you later. Bye.